Greetings. Welcome to a special edition of the Steve Deace Show. And boy, howdy, I cannot wait to get to this one. So if you guys are not familiar with our special editions, it's an opportunity that usually means, by the way, we're not here live today. But it's an opportunity for us to get a think piece and just really dig into it over the course of a couple of hours, or get somebody on who makes us think and really dig into that person over the course of a couple of hours. And this special edition will be the latter. But first, a word from our friends over at Preborn. You know, the headlines remind us daily that truth is being silenced, and when it's silenced, lives are at risk. So imagine you're a single mom with 2 children, no money, no support. And then you find out you're pregnant and with triplets. That was Veltasia's reality. She was alone, overwhelmed, afraid. The enemy had her contemplating the murder of her own children. Then she walked into a Preborn Network clinic surrounded by love, resources provided by people like you in this audience. And then she confronted the truth, and the truth set her free. And now all 3 of her children are alive, because the truth triumphed over fear because of your generosity. So this is why the truth matters more than ever before. And for as little as $28, you can fund the ultrasound that might be the next success story at Preborn. Dial pound 250 on your mobile phone and say the keyword baby to make your donation today, or go to preborn.com/Steve. Make your tax deductible donation today at preborn.com/Steve, because life matters. And one of our dear listeners sent me a link to a series of programs, and they sent this to me in early 2025 and said, listen, I know you're really interested in the occult origins of UFOlogy and how much you think this might be demonically inspired. This could be spirit of the age, deception, things of that nature. You need to listen to this series. And I began to listen to the very first episode, man, and I was absolutely captivated. I got through all 10 parts. I've listened to them all twice. It's among the best produced programming I have heard throughout the year 2025. Now, we're recording this in early August. We have no idea yet for sure of when you will actually see this episode. And as we typically tell you when we do these evergreen special editions, we can't tell you the specific date it will air yet, but we trust that in God's providence and sovereignty, it's going to air exactly when it needs to be heard. So you guys know the format. We have the guest for the first 90 minutes. Todd and Aaron are dutifully, Todd Ers and Aaron McIntyre, dutifully standing by and listening in. And they will come on for the final segment of the show and offer their commentary on what they just heard. In real time, because it's also what you just heard. And now let's hear from the guest. Colin Samul is here with us. And he is part of an outstanding podcast called Cultish that is, I believe you guys are associated with Jeff Durbin and his ministry. Am I right about that, Colin?
Correct. Yeah. The Cultish podcast was sort of nurtured under Apologia. I think they still are under their umbrella, but they're functionally operating as their own entity right now. So yeah, it's really apologetics is what Apologia is all about. And Cultish zeroes in on the realm of the cults and the occult, which they've really gotten into beyond just looking at Christian cults and other movements.
So our audience is going to be familiar with Jeff because he was the subject of the special edition Evergreen we did with him back in 2024. All right. So, I'm going to do my best not to Chris Farley this thing. We've had presidential candidates, former speakers of the House, world dignitaries, and I totally kept my composure through all of it. But with you here now, all right, I'm trying my best not to fanboy. Because I'm just saying straight up, your 10-part series on UFOlogy, its origins and what it's really all about. I just want to say straight up before we get into the content itself, in terms of stylistics, man, was extremely well done. So I wanted to give you a ton of props out there and really urge our audience, after listening to this, if they haven't heard it yet, to go listen to this, because we're going to just touch the surface, skim the surface of everything that Colin uncovers here. You want to listen to this series for itself, and it's also just a really good listen as well. So congrats on the work, brother.
I appreciate that. And then with that, I also want to give a shout out to the man that helped me produce it, Ryan Sexton. He is a member of the church I was pastoring at the time. And he's a talented younger man. And he put all the music together and everything. And I really think the sound effects and the way that he just spliced it all together really made it what it was beyond just the information. But I appreciate that.
You bet. And it's very well earned. All right, let's set the scene here before we go through, what you and I have outlined that we're going to try to talk about. And the audience knows I don't typically do outlines. I don't script anything, but the amount of content here that you have produced is so dense. I just felt like I wanted to make sure I didn't just meander, and we gave the audience, as much of a tasty morsel of what you have produced as we possibly could. But let's actually meander a little bit here at the top, if you don't mind. Let's set the scene. Because we are sitting here in early August as we're recording this, right? And kind of the mood with this is a lot of talk in UFO world that 2026 is a big year for disclosure. Steven Spielberg is producing his first big budget film in several years. I think it's actually called Disclosure. There's a documentary called Disclosure that has not had wide release yet, but Tim Burchett, a Republican congressman, was one of the guests of honors at the premiere in early 2025. Joe Rogan has talked about it on his show numerous times. The vice president of the United States recently said, right before you and I began taping this, that this is like his number one pet project is to get to the bottom of this and the truth where this is concerned. The director of national intelligence, Tulsi Gabbard, said in the days leading up to you and I recording this that she's not satisfied with the information being given to her on this unidentified aerial phenomenon, which is the new branding now, UAP. Nor is she even satisfied with the drone episodes were across the Jersey Shore over Christmas of 24, and then we saw this invade several military airspaces in our own country as well. So there does appear to be a level of escalation of the rhetoric of this and where this is all heading in the time period that you and I are discussing this. Who knows when this eventually runs, a few months from now or even next year, where the issue ultimately will be. So with that as a lead up, kind of your overall 10,000 foot view of this subject matter and, pardon the pun, phenomenon.
Okay, well, my overall perspective on this subject is that when you use the term UFO or UAP, you're talking about something unidentified, and you're absolutely right that there's that new term UAP. It's a new branding because that was really part of when they were rolling out this disclosure process. Just think about in Scripture where the one who gives names has authority over that. So when Adam was given dominion over the earth, he was told to name the animals, right? God, when he enters into covenant with Abram, renames him Abraham. We see this principle in Scripture because it's true that, right, you name your children and that shows your authority over them. And so UAP was really a way to begin this disclosure process and to begin it with a rebranding that came from inside the intelligence community, certain parts of the Pentagon, and to really make sure that they're wrestling control over this as they're releasing it. So my overall perspective on the phenomenon is, again, we're talking about something unidentified. So of course, misidentified things are going to be thrown into the UFO bucket. So we can all agree from the get-go, the vast majority of reports when people say they've seen a UFO, UAP, it has an explanation. But even going back to the Air Force's Project Blue Book, 5% were data-rich encounters that it wasn't that they just didn't have enough information, couldn't identify it. It was more that it was unidentifiable. And that's when you have craft displaying these bizarre characteristics, going from 0 to thousands of miles an hour and pulling hundreds of Gs, right angle turns, all this sort of stuff that we've heard about. And so when we talk about that part of the phenomenon, the real true UFOs or UAPs, my conclusion and the conclusion of even a lot of secular researchers like Jacques Vallee is that what we're dealing with is not interplanetary, but it shows indications of being something more interdimensional. That is, it's coming from another realm into this realm. And so as a Christian, when I open up scripture, and I see all the top researchers coming to that conclusion, giving their reasons. When I look and see those very characteristics that fit with something coming in from another dimension, when I open up Scripture and the Scripture talks about a spiritual realm, we see instances like in the Old Testament with where Elijah is right in 1 Kings. He is with one of his acolytes, and they're surrounded by the enemy. And he prays to the Lord to open up his eyes, and he sees that they're surrounded by these fiery chariots, right? That the angels are almost in parallel to this world, not always visible, but they show themselves at times and can act at times. So that the spirit world that we see in Scripture that interpenetrates with this realm fits exactly with what we observe in the phenomenon. We can get more into that, I'm sure, through this discussion. And going back historically, we find, especially after the Renaissance, that there is this desire amongst, there was John Dee, the Rosicrucians, these other Renaissance era secret societies where they were seeking to advance scientific research through, they thought they were Christians doing this, contacting angels, which of course is forbidden in Scripture, to seek out contact with the other side. But when we go back, we see that there is this tradition in Western culture of those who are seeking to advance civilization, those who are seeking to advance scientific research in modern times, going to the occult, going to the invisible world to look for insight in how we might advance our knowledge of the universe and of physics. Now, that got buried soon after the Renaissance as the Enlightenment broke out and materialism really became the reigning paradigm, but it was always there underground.
Metaphysics, alchemy, that's what you're kind of describing. Yeah.
All of that. Yeah, all of that. You can even see the roots of Freemasonry in some of that, though, of course, your average Freemason is just part of a men's club as far as they're concerned.
Right.
And then when the UFO phenomenon arises after World War II, there's some interesting figures that were associated with it who were part of that esoteric tradition.
Okay, we're gonna get to those. I'm gonna ask you about some of those names. As we go along, let's make sure we define terms. So you used the term Project Blue Book. That was essentially a psyop from the military-industrial complex to essentially propagandize that there was nothing to see here in the years after Roswell, and when this became a mainstream phenomenon. And even Mike Wallace on 60 Minutes is doing interviews with UFOs. They realized they had a problem. And so this was just basically professional debunking in order to stigmatize the phenomenon, correct? That's essentially what that was?
Correct. And it was rooted in what was called the Robertson panel, which was a CIA panel from the 50s that said, we need to do this because we don't want to create panic amongst the public. The Russians could use this to overwhelm our air defense systems. So that was the reason. Okay. And was the result.
You mentioned Jacques Vallee. If you've ever seen Close Encounters of the Third Kind, then you know who, you just didn't know his name maybe, but that's the French guy that's depicted interviewing Richard Dreyfuss when they start taking his what he claims he is seeing seriously. That's based off of Jacques Vallee, correct? If memory serves, right?
That is correct. Yep. And
so he's kind of your most respected metallurgist historically in the modern UFO movement, right? Was that a good way to describe him?
Yes, he has examined the metals along with a guy named Dr. Gary Nolan. He's also a computer scientist and really a systems analyst. He started off as an astronomer. So all those things kind of converged together. And he was working with J. Allen Hynek, who was the scientific advisor for Project Blue Book, who later blew the whistle that he was told to make up all these stories about swamp gas. And so Jacques Vallee was friends with him and helping him with his database. And the conclusions he came to was really from that systems analyst side of things, looking at the overall patterns of the UFO phenomenon. and then drawing conclusions as to what it appears to be doing. We see a lot of these men on the right now saying that the purpose of a system is what it does.
Yep.
Well, that is really the approach that Jacques Vallee took in looking at UFOs. That the purpose of UFOs is what they do. Yep. And based on what they do, he came to those conclusions that it's interdimensional and wants to change human beliefs.
Oh yeah, we're going to end up there by the end of this show, guys. I promise you. Okay, but let's have you guys learn a little bit about Colin first. Yeah, so my fascination with this stuff, I grew up in a pagan environment. My grandmother spent a lot of time, raising me. My mom was a teenager, so I spent a lot of time with my grandma. And so, she was really big into horror, the occult. I was around a lot of this stuff a lot. I read everything I could on every various Bigfoot, Yeti, snow monster, Kennedy conspiracy. I read them all, and UFOs, and then at about age 30, I get saved, I get converted, and then I lost a lot of my interest in those kinds of things. But now as I'm growing more mature in my faith here in recent years, I see things about what people are saying about this that we'll get into later that have me renewed in my interest in this, although out of spiritual concern, much more than expecting the arrival of the visitors. If you remember the beloved miniseries from our childhood, what brought you to this, Colin? Why do you care?
Yeah, well, that's going to go back to my testimony then. So I am a Presbyterian minister in a very conservative Reformed Presbyterian denomination. And so, yeah, people ask that question. How do you know so much about this? And why is this something that you're speaking to? But again, it goes back to my life before I became a Christian. So I was converted in 2005 at the age of 21. Prior to that, I was raised, my parents were Catholic. We stopped going to church, I think, around the time I was 4. And so I didn't have a whole lot of religious instruction growing up. And growing up in the 90s with things like sightings, the X-Files, unsolved mysteries, talking about everything from Roswell to the abduction cases and the rest of that, I kind of thought, okay, you're wrestling as a young person. What's real? What isn't? Is there anything beyond this life? And to me, being raised in the public schools, being taught evolution, okay, well, if there's anything that's real, it's probably this UFO alien stuff that people talk about. And I was mildly interested, read a couple books on it. I had sleep paralysis a few times. For whatever reason, I was terrified of the sight of grays. If I saw one on TV before going to bed, I just would have trouble sleeping. And what happened, though, is towards the end of high school, this was 2001, 9/11 happened my senior year. There was kind of a hippie revival amongst the youth, at least where I grew up in Metro Detroit. And so, I had long hair, a beard. People said I looked like depictions of Jesus. And, I looked like a regular hippie from the 60s and 70s.
You said, no, I'm just studying to be a future Presbyterian minister, as a matter of fact. Yes.
Yeah, exactly. So with that, of course, there's the drug culture with psychedelics and all of that, which I was into. Just that kind of stuff, though, really mind expanding, so to speak, things. I got into Eastern religions, and from Easter, the first religious book I read was the Bhagavad Gita. And then from there, got into the New Age, into the occult. And what I quickly discovered was that this UFO subject is tightly bound to the New Age and the occult. I mean, you cannot separate them. And in that same year, in 2001, Stephen Greer had his press conference where he had all these witnesses at the National Press Club. And so I heard about that, and I was just like, wow, like actual credible people who say there's reality to this. But it also mixes with the spirituality I'm into. And even Stephen Greer engages in those practices to seek to summon UFOs. This is a full-orbed worldview. And okay, maybe this is what we're need to be moving towards as a civilization. So I was really into this idea of disclosure. Well, 2 years later, the Lord had other plans. I got disillusioned with the occult and the New Age. I had some disturbing experiences with all of that and just saw it for what it is. But I didn't know what else to think. Okay, I can't be a materialist or an atheist because I know there's clearly something more. There's a spirit realm. And my girlfriend at the time just said, well, what about Christianity? And I said, well, I've never considered it. So I did all sorts of apologetics research, Case for Christ, all of that. Finally, I listened to a sermon by Ray Comfort entitled Hell's Best Kept Secret, that presents the law that shows us our sin and the gospel and substitutionary atonement, and how Jesus took the penalty that we deserve for our law breaking. He nailed our offenses to the cross, and he was raised again for our justification. Hearing that, the light bulb went on. I was really convicted of my sin just hearing that. And I repented and believed and then became a Christian. So it was 2005. And so immediately you're beginning to rethink everything.
Yep.
And so right away, I'm like, okay, well, clearly the Christians who say, I previously thought it was so ignorant when they said ghosts and UFOs are all demonic. Okay, you just write off anything you don't like as the devil. But it was like, clearly that's what this is. And I was really into the end time stuff when I was first converted. And a lot of those guys have all sorts of theories on what UFOs can be about as far as an end times deception. So that made sense. But I then put a plug in that and just said, okay, well, I need to grow as a Christian. So the next 20 years was my pursuit of ministry and my pursuit of seminary, and then finally becoming an elder in 2016, ordained in 2019. But I always said, I think just knowing the way people are and knowing what's really going on with this subject, that there is a reality. One day this is going to go mainstream, and perhaps I might be the type of person who can speak to it as a Christian. And so in 2017, when that news article broke, and I would keep an eye on the subject.
This is the New York Times breaking the seal and legitimizing ufology really for the very first time in mainstream media. Yeah.
Yeah, when I saw that, and I heard rumblings that Tom DeLonge was up to something. He was the lead singer of Blink-182. And knowing the landscape, just seeing what he was saying, who he was purportedly in contact with, it's like, this might be that disclosure everybody's been talking about. And then when it happened and I saw how it took in the media, I was like, okay, well, time to look into this a little bit more. So reached out to Cultish. I was friends with some of those guys. Said, hey, you guys should probably talk about this. I kept sending them news articles. Then finally they say, well, why don't you come on and talk about it? And I went, I was just ordained a year ago. I don't know what my church is going to think about that, or my colleagues. So we did one episode in 2019, then another in 2021 when the DNI report came out with my friend Ray Boucher. And then they asked me to do the 10-part series. And I spent years really embedding myself in the community as a side hobby and doing research. And that's how I gathered all the material for it's like almost, I look at it like I was an embedded reporter from a Christian perspective, reporting live what was going on and what it was leading up to, and then casting it from centuries past.
Mm-hmm. You used a term, because again, we're going to define our terms as we go along here, but you've used this term a few times already, the occult. Give our audience a quick layman's, I know that's tough to ask a Presbyterian minister, all right, but give our audience a quick layman's definition of this and why you see so much crossover between the occult and ufology.
Man, I feel like I'm in my Presbytery exams again. I thought I was past these days. So, okay, a simple definition of the occult would simply be, occult means secret or hidden. And so so what are you talking about that's secret or hidden? It's talking about secret or hidden knowledge, specifically pathways of initiation into forbidden knowledge and modalities of contact with the spirit world. So that's what the occult is. And it's usually tied to the hiddenness of it. So that's when we go back to the Rosicrucians. We go back to groups like early speculative Freemasonry.
You go all the way back to the garden. Did God really say that God's revelation is not sufficient for us, that we're entitled to know more, or God has set these things aside just for people who acquire, or whatever the divine presence is, has set these things aside for just very special people that unlock it, achieve it, or could possibly understand it?
Yeah, well said. That's exactly what it is. And it is, rooted in seeing an insufficiency in God's revelation, in how God's revelation lays out a robust worldview, and it's looking for that something more, which of course is exactly what the serpent promised to Eve in the Garden of Eden. So I would actually tie the occult back to Genesis 3, though a lot of occult groups go back to Egypt, Babylon, or at least claim to be recovering those mystery religions.
However, before we get into that, in these unprecedented times, Bing, make sure that you have an agent, not some fly-by-night moonlighter. That won't cut it. You want a real estate agent, one you can really trust, one you'll be really recommending to the people you care about for years to come. Where would you find such an agent? Well, the name says it all. Get started today at realestateagentsitrust.com. They will connect you with top-performing agents, whether you're trying to get across town or across the country, whose track records of success have been verified, or they would not be recommended to you. And a lot of times, not always, but a lot of times they come from right here in the Blaze audience as well, so that you've got values, not to mention taste, in common too. So get started today with an agent, and you need an agent you can trust even when the real estate market isn't unprecedented. It's one of the most stressful things you can ever do in life. Realestateagentsitrust.com is where you want to go to make sure that you can get to where you need to go by going to realestateagentsitrust.com. We've got about 2 minutes before the first break. You brought up a name, Stephen Greer. Our audience probably is a little familiar with him. I've talked about him before. And one, to me, him, Russ Colthart, we may get into him as well. He's kind of he's the 60 Minutes guy in Australia who's kind of tried to become the mainstream News Nation point person covering this issue. But I've noticed with these guys, they always start off talking about this phenomenon in scientific terms, Colin. That it's a matter of human advancement, Star Trekian, Gene Roddenberry-esque terminology. And then they usually end up describing, if you stick with them long enough, they'll eventually either evolve into or reveal that what they're really peddling is a transcendent experience, like a religion, like the occult, for example. And now it's not scientific advancement, but these beings, whoever they are, have knowledge to share with us that has been hidden from us. And it will change everything we know and understand about human existence. This pattern is reoccurring with these high-profile figures, no?
Oh, it is the phenomenon that is what it leads people into. I don't know of a single case where it doesn't lead to that. And I think the best framework to explain or kind of give a background structure of how that works is C.S. Lewis in the beginning of the Screwtape Letters says that the devil will either have us be one of two things. He will either have us be materialists or magicians.
Magicians, yeah.
And so for the past 300 years or so, the Western world has been materialistic. What this phenomenon does is ropes you in with, the holy grail of materialism, advanced technology that can get us off planet, perhaps make us live extended eternal lives, live like gods. But then once you get into it, you find yourself becoming a magician. And that's exactly what I believe the phenomenon's doing. It's a portal, a pathway of initiation into the occult that uses this pop level meme of space invaders to get people's attention.
That is a great description. And you hit the cue. We're right up against the break here. And that's exactly where we're going to pick up this conversation when we come back. Because one of the things you'll find if you get into studying this phenomenon is there's terms and terminologies frequently used that are not usually associated with science, but instead are associated with acts of religion. And we're going to pick up the conversation from there. And what does arguably the most famous occultist in Western history have to do with UFOs. We'll get into that as well and more with Colin Samul of Cultish here for our Evergreen Special Edition next.
The Steve Deace Show.
So is the UFO phenomena new, or is it really just some old-time religion, like the old gods, the old religions? We're talking about that with Colin Samul, who's here with us. He is the host of an outstanding, must-listen-to 10-part series on this for the Cultish podcast associated with Apologia. However, I need to let you know that today is your last chance to grab Kexie's Halloween cookies. They are incredible. They sent me a box of these. Holy cow. I mean, holy cow. Including the mummy cookie. It's a chocolate cookie stuffed with Nutella, packed with white chocolate chips, topped with their homemade frosting, the butter one, the pumpkin one. The Halloween cookies were incredible. This is your last chance, and then they're going to be gone for good. All right? But don't worry. Kexie is already moving on to the other fall flavors. They're perfect for Thanksgiving. Starting November 1, Boston cream pie, the cookie, sweet potato pie, the cookie, and more. Gourmet, unforgettable. They are absolutely unforgettable. They're very decadent. They're awesome. Guaranteed to impress friends and family at any gathering, and they're delicious. These cookies are phenomenal. I can't recommend them highly enough. Shipped right straight to your door so you can treat yourself or make a big impression with gifts for family, friends, and coworkers. Head to Kexie, KEKSI.com. Use the code DACE15 for 15% off at checkout, Kexie.com, code DACE. And Jeff Durbin's crew. And of course, we had Jeff on for a special edition here on the Steve Deace Show back in 2024. All right, so sort of the carrot and the stick here. This starts off very Star Trekian. It ends up, very occultic. And one of the things that I've noticed, we played an interview in early 2025 on from News Nation with David, not David Gresh, but another one of these whistleblowers, and a guy who claimed that he was called in to airlift one of these UAP, and he talked about this maternally spiritual experience of emotion and everything that he had. And I played this for our audience and pointed out certain terminologies that he was using. And you see this with Russ Coulthart, you see this with Stephen Greer and a lot of these guys. So it ends up being about science, right? This is Elon Musk is going to take us to Mars and everything else. But then we end up using terms like higher consciousness. Or one of my favorites that these people use a lot, Colin, summoning. Mm-hmm. Summoning. How would you summon a craft? How would you summon that? Right? No, can you stand on it? Why don't these people stand on a tarmac and summon an airplane? Why doesn't it work like that? Right? And this kind of terminology that is usually, you mentioned the materialistic era that we are currently in. If you walked into most universities in America, even still, and talked about higher consciousness and summoning, they'd throw you out. All right? And yet that is replete within the lexicon of a lot of the UFO community, including a lot of its most high-profile whistleblowers, proxies, spokespeople. Why?
Because it has always been that. That's why. And even when you look at instances of UFO encounters where a person is not quote unquote brought on the craft or does not speak to the alleged pilots of the craft, even if it is witnessed from a distance, it will often, they'll speak of feeling like the object was watching them as if they had some sort of conscious connection to it. And there was actually a documentary that was put out on Netflix that Steven Spielberg's studio put out. I forgot the name of it. I think it was called Encounters. Mm-hmm. And that religious theme is there. This guy says it came in the field, his field of vision, and then kind of enveloped his field of vision, this bright, shiny object. And he said he felt like he was one with it. And so often that's exactly what happens. And then that leads the person into new thoughts about reality. And it's always how can I consciously have that experience again? But very often, if someone is in constant contact, like they claim to be a contactee or an abductee, the point is to develop these supposed psychic abilities where they can, even without the visitors being present, they claim to be receiving messages from them. And so it's just ubiquitous. And yeah, that instance, like you said, I forgot the gentleman's name. I know his last name starts with a B, I'm pretty sure. It's escaping me right now, but he was one of these recent whistleblowers. He said that he picked up this egg-shaped craft with a helicopter. And when he did, he had this overwhelming emotion. He said it was a divine feminine experience of the divine feminine, which is something that you keep hearing about coming from UFO circles, which definitely is new age. And the egg is a very pagan divine feminine symbol. And so it's always been a part of it. And it always leads to that. Like you said, even Ross Coulthart has talked about that. And
they all go out with their psionic friends to this retreat in California where they just sit around. It looks like the Beatles and the Stones in the Summer of Love are recording All You Do Is Love on via satellite. Okay, they're just out there hanging around, lounging around, but minus bell bottoms, and no one's passing a bong. But they're just lounging around out there doing psionics and attempting to summoning these beings. I mean, they just do this out in the open now.
Exactly. And then they, again, like I said in the intro, they rebrand it. It's not summoning, it's psionics,
yes,
which sounds very scientific and very measured, not as woo as summoning or channeling or even just saying psychically connecting or whatnot. So it's all in your face, but there's that rebranding where they change the language. So it confuses people, but intrigues them. And it sounds official, right? And scientific.
One of, if not the most famous occultist, to the point he's often been accused of being a Satanist in the history of the West, is Aleister Crowley. At the time that you and I are recording this, we are just weeks after the death of Ozzy Osbourne, one of his most famous songs, Mr. Crowley. Okay. And I was kind of blown away listening to your miniseries of his connection to all of this. Can you go into some details along those lines for us?
Sure. So Aleister Crowley, interestingly enough, was raised in a dispensational home. He grew up as a Plymouth Brethren, which is where the dispensational movement came out of. Very strict religious upbringing. He grows up, he rejects the upbringing that he received, but right, like all of us, his priors are still what he was raised with. And not only did he get into a debauchery, but he began to get into the occult, and then even had this fascination with wanting to either be the Antichrist or summon the Antichrist. And so he immediately went on a spiritual search. He joined the Order of the Golden Dawn, which claimed to be carrying on the magical system of John Dee, a medieval magician who claimed to be in contact with Enochian angels after the patriarch Enoch. And he really embraced that, kind of became the master of that system. In the early 1900s in Egypt, he receives channeling from a being he calls Aiwass about this new age of Horus that will be the end of Christianity. And the dogma of the age of Horus is do what thou wilt shall be the whole of the law, which is something you see in rock and roll over and over.
We quoted it. It's in our script to our movie Nefarious. We quoted that. Yes. Yep.
And in Alan Moore, who wrote V for Vendetta, he was into Crowley's system. And in the comic book, especially, V cites that to Evie. Do what thou wilt. So it's this idea of overthrowing Christianity and morality. Do your own thing. If it feels good, do it. If it doesn't hurt anybody, what's wrong with it? That's the ethics of our modern world now. But he also had this contact with the other side. And interestingly enough, he I think at a few times even referred to the beings as extraterrestrials, meaning they are beyond terra firma. And he really promoted not only this new law, but also this system he received from John Dee. He was also into the Kabbalah on how to contact these entities.
That's an obscure sect of Judaism focused on mysticism, occultism, kind of the Jewish version of Gnosticism is a good way of describing that, maybe. Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
Yep.
All right. Go ahead.
That's yep. And of course, a lot of Hollywood people are into that.
Mm-hmm.
Madonna had the bracelet she used to wear. But he then reports an encounter with another being called Lamb. And he even drew a sketch of how this being appeared to him. And you can Google it, and it looks like our typical gray alien, not quite as menacing with the big black almond eyes, but the big bulbous head, the upside down pear head, and more had a aura of wisdom. It looked similar to like 1950s space aliens that you might see in like
the day the Earth stood still, stuff like that. Take me to your leader, kind of
exactly.
stuff. Okay.
So you see that connection there with him, and he was very much into consciousness expansion and how that ties into nuclear physics and how we're getting a new picture of reality. But he had a disciple named Jack Parsons, and he even thought Jack Parsons was like going to take the baton from him. And just to make a long story short, I'll get into him a little bit more, but Jack Parsons basically created the formula for chemical rockets. So whether it's an ICBM, a rocket ship that goes into space, anything like that, he came up with a stable formula and how to put this together in a rocket that's flyable and maneuverable and controllable.
I want to make sure our audience catches this.
Yes.
One of the most important advents of engineering in modern human history came from a disciple acolyte of arguably the most infamous occultist Satanist in Western history, Aleister Crowley.
Exactly. And you think about the potential "you shall be as gods" launching into space, or we will destroy ourselves, nuking and ending life on the planet, both coming from this one man. And so he had a temple, a lodge that he ran out of his home in Pasadena. He was always into science fiction. So he had that influence.
Talking about Parsons now, not Crowley, because he was in the UK. So we're talking about Parsons now. We're
talking about Parsons now. Yeah, we're moving on to Parsons. And Crowley actually wanted to come to Southern California to kind of anoint him as the next leader of the OTO, which is their magical order. And the FBI, the Air Force, or the Army Air Corps was investigating him. There's documents that have been released about how they were investigating what he was up to in his lodge. They ended up taking away his clearance later because he was found to be spying for the newly formed nation of Israel. But he kept his work developing the rocket, and he started NASA's JPL Lodge, the Jet Propulsion Laboratory in Pasadena, California, which some people also see as a dual meaning, Jack Parsons Laboratory. But what's significant about him is he had a friend named L. Ron Hubbard, and I'm sure we all know who L. Ron Hubbard is, the man who founded Scientology, who is also a disciple of Crowley. And Hubbard came into this lodge with him, and they engaged in a magical working called the Babylon working in 1946 that was going out into the desert, doing some pretty intense rituals, seeking to open up a portal or a stargate to these intelligences that Crowley had been in contact with, this Enochian magic. And from what they claimed, the ritual was successful. And Marjorie Cameron, who was the Scarlet Woman that they thought the entities had sent them to be part of this ritual, and of course, that is not G-rated, what her part of it was. After she went home, she actually said she saw a UFO above her house, and this is before Kenneth Arnold's sightings a year later. And then when Kenneth Arnold had his first sighting in 1947, and then everything erupts with saucer fever in 1947, that would have been
Roswell and the Roswell incident in 1947 and all that other stuff, right?
All that other stuff, yeah. Yep. Kenneth Anger Kenneth Anger, who was a disciple of Crowley, associate of Parsons. Parsons, had a lot of connections. He said that what Hubbard and Parsons did is they pierced the veil, and these UFOs that were coming through were an effect of that. And so at least that's what he said. People have drawn connections that Kenneth Arnold, who witnessed the first people have drawn a connection between Kenneth Arnold and Parsons, that they may have knew one another, and other people who early on had experiences with sightings of UFOs in 1947. And so there's actually a book written called Final Events by Nick Redfern that featured my friend Ray Boucher, who I interviewed on the podcast, about this government group within the U.S. government that almost everybody from Ross Coulthart to everybody says, no, it's a real group. It's called the Collins Elite. So that's COLLINS Elite. So people debate what the name is there associated with. But this government group drew this connection back to Parsons and saw this as a manifestation of occult phenomenon. And they had all this info on Parsons because they had been investigating him and drew that connection. And so that is well known. Even Tom DeLonge in his book, which he's the one that really got this going in 2017. Again, he talks about Parsons, Crowley, and all of this. So it's not just a conspiracy theory or a view of some. It's basically part of the folklore that everyone's aware of who looks at the history of what's going on here.
All right, so we're up against the next break. So what we're positing here, because the popular theory in ufology is that, because of the advent of weapons of mass destruction in World War II, this greatly accelerated the notice of extraterrestrial beings and explains their increased, encounters with us and exposure to us. And maybe they're here to stop us from destroying ourselves. But there's an alternative here that perhaps this actually is the culmination of several different fronts of occultic activity that maybe actually created some form of a successful ritual that would have opened a door to some form of interdimensional portal that would also explain with maybe as the true origin of all of these. So when we come back, I'm going to ask you a question, Colin, that we have been wrestling with on this show whenever we talk about this, because there's something about this that just doesn't make any sense to me. And I want to get your reaction and see if you think it's a viable question or not. And then I want to know if you think any of this is real, how much of this you think is a hoax or a scam. We'll get into that and more. Colin Samul is here with us. Is it the occult or is it a UFO? More to come. Stay tuned. All right, back here with hour 2 of a special edition of the Steve Deace Show. We're not live today, but we are original. Todd Erz and Aaron McIntyre are going to be joining us here at the bottom of the hour with their thoughts as we continue on in a few minutes here with Colin Samul from the Cultish podcast with Apologia Radio, talking about UFOlogy. Is it a real unidentified flying phenomenon? Is it extraterrestrial, or is it the occult? Is it spiritual deception? We'll get more into that with Colin, but first, don't forget to let us know what you think about what we think via the stevedeace.com inbox by emailing us, steve@stevedeace.com. That's DEACE. Like us on Facebook, MeWe, and Gab. You can follow me at Steve Deace Show on X, Instagram, and TikTok. Please subscribe to our new YouTube channel at Deace Show on YouTube. That's at Deace Show on YouTube. And then finally, if you are a podcast listener, thank you. You guys are the biggest part of our audience. If you wouldn't mind, leave us a 5-star review. Tens of thousands of you have. We appreciate them all. We'd appreciate if you join them today, too. And then you can also hit subscribe, or if you're on Apple/iTunes, that means these days you hit follow. And that will ensure that every time time we do one of these episodes, you can be sure that it is sitting there in your podcast feed. But before we get to that, the answer to the age-old question that has befuddled philosophers since time immemorial: how is it possible that Steve Deace will not have to get up in the middle of the night to pee? Well, that wasn't the question you were thinking of? Well, that's the question that had been befuddling me until I tried Beam's Dream Powder. Proudly founded in America, run by people who share our values like hard work, integrity, delivering results. It's a healthy nighttime blend packed with science-backed ingredients shown to improve sleep, so you sleep soundly, and for me, all the way the night through. Wake up, refresh, ready to go, take on the day. Lots of great flavors. I'm into the chocolate peanut butter. And here's the deal. You can get it for the Patriot discount for up to 40% off right now with the promo code Steve when you go to shopbeam.com/Steve. That's Beam, B-E-A-M, as in laser beam. Shopbeam.com/Steve with the promo code Steve to get up to 40% off with the code Steve at shopbeam.com/Steve. So we've talked to Colin so far about his fascination with this, what drew him to this subject, some of the occultic history of UFOs and the unidentified aerial phenomenon, at least as far as we have been tracking with it in the West, particularly in modern times. And some infamous names like L. Ron Hubbard and Aleister Crowley are tied into this. But now, Colin, we come to a question that we have pondered on this show, and it's kind of our official show position on this subject matter as of the time that we are filming this with you in early August, okay? And our official show position is, come to us when you show us bodies. Because the issue that I kind of have with this is we have all of this, especially since the initial disclosure of 2017, where the military decided to go ahead and acknowledge this for the first time. And now it's kind of funny to watch the UFO community on X. You're a grifter. No, you're a grifter. You're a psyop. No, you're a psyop. All right. There's this one guy who's, is it Joe something? Who's everywhere? Is he really a government agent?
Murgia.
What's that?
Joe Murgia.
Yes. Yeah. Is he really a government agent or not? Okay. Is he for real? Did he really run this program or not? Right. All right. Who's the true believer and who's really the psyop or the grifter? Okay. But you know, we've got all these, the Tic Tac and all this other stuff, these compelling images of craft. What I find fascinating, though, is we have no compelling imagery of the pilots. Now, how is this possible? And that's why our official show position is, come back to us when you show us the pilots. What do you think of that position and question?
I think it is a very wise question to ask because, and I say this because that is really those who are the UFO believers, the sort of holy grail or the core story that a lot of them hold to is that these are some sort of physical beings, whether they're from outer space, maybe from another dimension, but they're still kind of viewed as like physical, where they can pass back and forth, or time travelers. It's something very physical, inhabited by some sort of quasi-biological beings like we are. And that is an extraordinary claim. That is definitely a claim that would cause all of us to wrestle through various questions if it was really laid out in front of us. But that's the thing, is we need something more than stories. And we need something even more from stories that come from many insiders, because the government's really good at creating a maze of disinformation, even within the government, to conceal things. To be doing one thing, but put out, the story that misleads even people within the government about some other thing that they're doing. And so until we have real firm evidence, I think that is, as far as that question goes, that definitive conclusion as to what this is. Yeah, show me the bodies. Mm-hmm. I would say even show me the intact craft and not just little pieces of something that you say fell from the sky during a sighting. Personally, I'm very skeptical that the government actually has craft that are intact, that are from some non-human source, because it's not from one of our adversaries. The same thing with any claims of biologics, as they call it. I really think when we hear people talking about the government reverse engineering alien tech, I think you think of the X-Files with a hangar with, right, this saucer inside of it, with men with machine guns guarding it, and there's this
Hangar
very nuts and
18.
bolts
Yes. Yeah.
scientific thing. But I think what I've seen is that a lot of what is actually going on with reverse engineering is there's elements of the government that are going to places like Skinwalker Ranch, that supernatural ranch in Utah.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a History Channel show about it. I talked about it in the podcast. And they are trying to observe the phenomenon that they know is much more elusive than aliens. They're trying to observe the phenomenon and see if they can't produce those same effects through technology. So just like how if you look at a B-2 bomber and from the side, it looks like a falcon flying. Annie Jacobson, who wrote a book on DARPA, talks about how, there's whole branches in the Pentagon where they study insects and bugs to try and figure out how to make better drones. So just as sometimes we study nature to come up with technology that imitates nature, so there does appear to be those in the government who are going the other direction, not physical nature. They are trying to, like that tradition of Rosicrucianism and the occult, summon from the spirit realm and see if those same effects that entities in the spirit realm can perform, they can turn into something that is mirrored in technology. And again, by observing it, maybe looking for physical effects and how can we... So this is tied to your question because I have a working theory that I actually think the whole bodies and crafts is a meme covering for what I just described. So the story gets out that they're doing that, but it's being sensationalized and spun. So I that's one of my working theories. It's sort of my assumption because it's based off the facts of what we know. But again, if there's something more going on, again, show me the bodies. I agree with you.
What do you think is real? Instead of extraterrestrials, do you believe our government has made contact with non-human intelligence of other origins, a spiritual origin, an interdimensional origin? Do you believe any of these abduction stories are real? Like a Whitney Strieber, who was a famed writer and kind of the first person who, let's just face it, most people didn't think was retarded or a redneck to claim he was abducted and kind of mainstream this for the very first time, right? And he's turned this into a 30-year, 35, 40-year speaking engagement for him around the country. What do you think is real and what do you think is not?
Okay. Let's separate that into two categories: encounter with craft, encounter with beings. So there are definitely encounters with crafts that are anomalous, that would be beyond what we would expect from next gen technology from us or an adversary. And those reports have been consistently written down, reported throughout history, that I think we can conclude, again, it's not a secretive government program. I do think there may be anti-gravitics that our government has been using. And I think they use the UFO phenomenon to confuse the public about which is which. There's a document, Jesse Michaels, who has a good podcast on UFOs. He gets a lot of good content. He mentions this document from the 50s that says, let's use the UFO phenomenon to confuse about our black budget programs. So it doesn't say let's make up UFOs as a cover for black budget programs. Let's use this existing phenomenon to confuse people about, and our adversaries especially, about what we have and what we're working on. So some of it is, I do think the government has and has had for some time some pretty exotic stuff. But when you go back to World War II, right after World War II, where you hear about flying butane tanks, that sounds a lot like the Tic Tac. Mm-hmm. They're just describing the same thing using a different model for what they're comparing it to. When you go back even to John Winthrop's journals in the Massachusetts Bay Colony, he talks about some fishermen on the river who witnessed a illuminated object that was shaped like a swine or a pig. So what does the body of a pig look like? It's kind of round and long, right? Mm-hmm. It's this fat slug looking thing. So they described what it looked like. You could say that is similar to a butane tank or a tic tac, just using agricultural language from the time. It was darting above the town, and then they ended up upriver 2 hours later, and they didn't know how they got there. That sounds just like some of these reports we hear. I know people who've seen things. My dad, when he was in the Air Force as a security officer, witnessed a tic tac hovering and then shooting off. And he called it in. They said it was a rocket launching from where NASA launches rockets there in Florida. So clearly people are seeing things. A lot of it is misidentified. Some of it can also probably be labeled as black budget technology. So that is real. When it comes to contact with beings like Whitley Strieber and others, I do really go back to John Mack's research. He was the head of psychiatry at Harvard, and he got pulled into investigating cases of people claiming that they were abducted. And when he looked into it, he found many of them are accomplished people from all walks of life. They're mentally healthy. The only thing that's wrong with them is they have PTSD, and they're all reporting the same sequence of events that's happening to them at night. And so he came to the conclusion it was real. Harvard he was going around on Oprah and other places talking about it. They wanted to take away his tenure over it, which it's a lot for a university to want to try and do that. Tenure is very protected. And it was actually Alan Dershowitz who assisted him in defending himself, and they let it go and said, no, his research methods are sound. And these are the conclusions he's come to. Mm-hmm. So I think that phenomenon of abduction is real, but again, when you look at it, it is very similar to fairy kidnappings from medieval lore. St. Augustine talks about incubi and succubi in the City of God, mm-hmm. and he ties that to demonic activity. And so again, are there really beings coming from the other side of the galaxy to come down and sexually assault people and do all these strange things to them? And then you look at the contactees, even though they've been traumatized, and yet they're like, oh, but in the end, it was such a profound experience and I'm glad for it. And they were just trying to shock me out of my Western way of thinking. And then they, like Whitley Strieber, embraces a fully Eastern New Age perspective, though he had been Roman Catholic. So again, it appears to be that pathway of initiation, and you don't hear about abduction so much anymore. And the book Skinwalkers at the Pentagon, that was approved by the Pentagon for release by the two scientists who worked on ATIP, they talked about there's different phases of the phenomenon since the 50s. And one of those phases was the abduction phenomenon in really the 70s through the 90s, but it's sort of phased out. And they speculate that this is almost like in Freemasonry, where you go through different levels of initiation, that the phenomenon is doing different things at different times to affect people directly, but as Jacques Vallee says, also to then cause these basic ideas to spread out and percolate through society to where it changes mass consciousness of society. And your average person doesn't even realize it, doesn't even realize that this phenomenon has changed the way we think about so much. If I have a few more moments here, a good thing to map that to would be the QAnon movement. The QAnon movement, right, it seems very silly. It made people laugh when all of a sudden people were buying into this around 2020, this idea that the world is controlled by these satanic pedophile elites. And so your crazy uncle who's wears a MAGA hat is talking about it, and you laugh him off. And everyone knows about the silliness of all of this. But then you turn on the halftime show at the Super Bowl and you see your favorite celebrity dancing around with horns and all this satanic imagery. And you go, well, hey, wait just a minute. Is he on to something, right? And now, after years later, it's almost mainstream that everybody now believes that this world is run by some compromised people. That basic narrative, which was the payload wrapped in all this extreme silliness, has percolated out into the culture. And even people who were laughing at its bizarre manifestation when that movement first started now are accepting some of the underlying ideas that were there, which I think that was all a psyop. And we can talk about what the purpose was, but the phenomenon does the same thing with these. That's what Jacques Vallee gets into, these bizarre experiences that cause the upper echelons of society to reject it. The intelligentsia doesn't want to take it seriously, but from a folk level, the basic ideas begin to spread, and in very profound ways, it changes the way society thinks about mankind, our place in the universe, and all of that. So those two things are real, but as I just laid out, especially with the contact phenomenon, what's going on is a lot different than what most people think of when they think of these pop culture images of alien abductions.
All right, I've got two more things I want to make sure I get to ask you about in the final 10 minutes we have. Okay. First, a couple of names that our audience, as this is becoming more and more mainstream, I think that they need to know. Diana Pasulka, they think that's her name, right? That's one of them. And then you mentioned him earlier, Dr. Gary. You mentioned Nolan from Stanford, right? These are two names that are growing within this movement. Who are they? I think our audience should know who they are.
Sure. So Diana Pasulka is a professor of religious studies that from the University of North Carolina, I believe Wilmington is her campus. And so she was brought into this around the same time Tom DeLonge was. She did a book on purgatory and old stories from the medieval time of purgatory and experiences nuns had of balls of light coming into their cells and little beings showing up. And, she just, okay, this is medieval Catholic lore. And her friend said, well, that sounds a lot like Close Encounters of the Third Kind. Yeah. She's like, I never thought about that. So she went to a UFO conference to kind of go, okay, what are the religious implications? What overlap is there? Maybe this continuing mythology that now manifests as this UFO stuff. And she went there and met some contactees who are in touch with the government, like a guy named Chris Bledsoe. There's a movie going to be coming out about him. I don't know what it is.
Oh, this guy, so people that don't know, he did the show that Sean Ryan recorded an interview, then wasn't going to run the interview. Then they put pressure on him to run it. And he made some crazy claims. He can summon these things over his house. His whole family is involved in this. That's who Chris Bledsoe is, if I remember right. However, before we get back to more scintillating programming, can I ask you a personal question? Do you believe that I'm worth 26 cents a day? How about $8 a month? What if I'm probably not, but what if I throw Glenn Beck and Mark Levin in? And Ali Stuckey and the rest of our lineup here at The Blaze, because that's what it costs if you use my last name, Deace, as your promo code to get your annual subscription to Blaze TV today at blazetv.com/Deace. You can gift it as well to the discerning patriot in your life just in time for Christmas. With the promo code Deace, you get $20 off your annual subscription. So it works out to just 26 cents a day, $8 a month. I do agree. It is debatable whether I am worth 26 cents a day, but I think we all know that Glenn Beck is. I think we all know pretty much everybody else here is, just maybe not me. All right. So again, use the code Deace at blazetv.com/Deace. Get your discounted subscription today with the promo code Deace at blazetv.com/Deace.
Yep. And all these government people have been all over him for years.
Yep.
Showing up at his property and all of that. So she met him, and then through him met Gary Nolan, who in her first book goes under a false name, a pseudonym, James. and then another guy named Tyler, named after Tyler Durden from Fight Club, because she compares this group of scientists studying this to Fight Club, right? What's the rule of Fight Club? Don't talk about Fight Club. What's the second rule of Fight Club? Don't talk about Fight Club. All these scientists doing this research, just not even talking amongst themselves directly about what they're doing, but using euphemisms. And so she has really been the religious studies person involved with this, and she's brought a lot of academic credibility. She does have insider contact within the government. She's been tapped as she speaks to speak to congressmen and congresswomen about how to message some of this to the public. And she, as a Catholic, at times she sounds like a liberal Roman Catholic, though other times the reality of this seems to really be affecting her, and as she said, has made her more Catholic. So she says a lot of things that I disagree with and that I don't agree with religiously. She's wrong on a lot of things. But as far as her understanding of this as a religious spiritual phenomenon, she's spot on. And she's really good at, hey, be skeptical, because there's so much disinformation and intelligence people all over this subject that nothing is often as it appears. Gary Nolan, again, has identified himself as that person named James from her book, and he has had experiences since he was young, abduction type experiences. He is now a professor, I believe, of genetics at Stanford University. He was approached back in the same time frame when everything was happening with Tom DeLonge too, to begin to medically examine both those who had Havana syndrome, but then others who had come into close contact with the phenomenon and some of the changes that occurred in their brain. He's also received metal fragments that he's taken to Stanford, allegedly from UFOs, to test and look at its atomic structure. And his main thing is that what they found with experiencers, whether it's these pilots or others, is they found a protein-dense part of the brain between the caudate and the putamen that is often present in savants or those who are really good athletes who can make split-second decisions, who are intuitive. They found a high amount of connection in experiencers. The question is, did they have those connections before they had the experience, and therefore the phenomenon was attracted to them? Or did the experience with neuroplasticity cause them to have their brains altered in that way? But again, he really goes to great lengths to not draw any conclusions, but sort of what Diana has said more openly, and people who know her, that even things she won't say publicly because she doesn't want to be with her feet held to the fire about it, is that people in the government do think that might be the mechanism where people have these experiences, and then they claim to be receiving messages from the phenomenon, new insights into whether it's their view of reality, or they find themselves all of a sudden coming up with ideas that they didn't have before. So that one guy, Tim Taylor, that's the name of the man that she calls Tyler. He claims to have received all sorts of ideas for technology through these psychic impressions that come from the phenomenon that, as she said once, supposedly some of it's in our smartphones. I don't know how true all that is, but that's her consistent story, and Gary has talked about it as well. And so again, it goes back to this medieval, going back to the Rosicrucians, right, of going to contact entities to get these abilities and insights into technology and all of that. So
the thing, pardon me 1 second, Colin. The thing that I want our audience to understand is this stuff is reaching into government and academia at the absolute highest levels, and the kind of thing we did not see on a societal basis, really, except in the pre-Christian era, right? This is the kind of stuff you saw in Norse, Druid, pagan cultures where these sorts of ideologies were practiced or incentivized or encouraged at a cultural institution level. We've just not seen this since the Christianization of the West, right? Which We're got 3 minutes. Now brings me to the last question I got time to ask you. What happens if there is a purported first contact? Would it be a demonic delusion? Is it possible we are not the only intelligent life that God has created in the universe? What do you think? And you know what? You have 3 minutes to answer one of the most difficult questions in all of human history. So go ahead.
Yeah. Okay. So I would be very prone to see it as a demonic delusion if there's first contact. Just thinking eschatologically, there's the sixth vial in Revelation that talks about 3 unclean spirits like frogs that go forth to gather the nations together for war. There is a strong tradition or stories of nukes being turned on and off, almost like the phenomenon's trying to provoke a war. So there could be some eschatological things there that people have tied it to. Are we the only ones in the universe? Well, as I say in my podcast, as a Calvinist, I see the glory of God as the purpose of creation. Creation is not anthropocentric, so even salvation is about the glory of God in saving his people. So just like we can have these creatures at the bottom of the Marianas Trench that are weird, the one with the glowing booger that hangs in front of its face, it's just kind of ugly looking and it's not there for food for us. What's the purpose? Well, you'd say it's for the glory of God, his creative design. So if there was other intelligent life out there, then we would have to say, or other life in general, that it's for God's glory. But we still have to wrestle with the uniqueness of mankind being made in God's image, called to reflect his moral attributes, being body and soul. God entered into covenant with our first father, Adam. And as we all know, we in Adam broke that covenant. And now we are dead in trespasses and sins. And salvation does not come through our own ability to perfect ourselves like in alchemy. It doesn't come through contact with the spirit world. That's how we fell with Genesis 3. It comes through Jesus Christ, the Son of God, the eternal Logos, who took on flesh and died in the place of sinners, taking the punishment they deserve. And he lived the perfect life, keeping the law that we broke perfectly, so that when we trust in him, we are now free from sin. We are now free from guilt and the pollution of sin. One day we'll be free from death. Even now, death has no sting. And we are also free from the demonic powers. We don't need to deny their existence or fear their existence or be obsessed with their existence. We know they're there, but Christ has conquered. He is King of Kings and Lord of Lords. As my denomination, we publish a book called Messiah the Prince by William Symington, which is the original Christian nationalist book. And he emphasizes, Christ rules over all things, even the evil powers. And so God's people are secured. And that is the only contact that we are to seek, because it's the only solution to our condition is reconciliation with God in Christ.
Amen. Colin, this was incredible. Absolutely incredible. And I want our audience to know we scratched the surface of what is in his 10-part series. Make sure to go listen to it over at Cultish. Colin, thank you so much for the time, brother. We're going to talk about you behind your back now. All right. So.
All right. Well, you wouldn't be the first. So.
All right. God bless. More to come here in a moment.
The Steve Deace Show.
All right, I am, as much as I was looking forward to the conversation we just had, I might be even more looking forward to the conversation we are about to have. All right, because we just attempted over the last 90 minutes here to peel back as many layers of this onion as we've ever been able to, with as much as we have discussed it. And it's kind of just been a segment here and a segment there, but it keeps coming back, keeps being in the news over and over and over again. And it just feels like we're being lured into more and more of a philosophical honeypot here, a trap, if you will. And so I think it was incredibly providential that a guy who grew up into the occult and to these kinds of mysteries and then goes completely the other way in becoming like a hardcore Calvinist Presbyterian minister So he goes from God has no sovereignty to having a very high view of God's sovereignty. I think he ended up being an extremely qualified tour guide to walk us through what is still an evolving story. And so with that, I mean, we covered a ton, but we still just scratched the surface of his 10-part series. But with that, Todd and Aaron, you guys have been sitting here for the last 90 minutes. I have no leading questions at all other than what you think. But first, a word from our friends over at Preborn. You know, the headlines remind us daily that truth is being silenced, and when it's silenced, lives are at risk. So imagine you're a single mom with 2 children, no money, no support. And then you find out you're pregnant and with triplets. That was Veltasia's reality. She was alone, overwhelmed, afraid. The enemy had her contemplating the murder of her own children. Then she walked into a Preborn Network clinic surrounded by love resources provided by people like you in this audience. And then she confronted the truth, and the truth set her free. And now all 3 of her children are alive because the truth triumphed over fear because of your generosity. So this is why the truth matters more than ever before. And for as little as $28, you can fund the ultrasound that might be the next success story at Preborn. Dial pound 250 on your mobile phone and say the keyword baby to make your donation today, or go to preborn.com/Steve. Make your tax deductible donation today at preborn.com/Steve, because life matters.
So I'll begin. To me, this conversation was kind of the equivalent on this subject of the rapid onset political enlightenment conversation, which is one of the favorite conversations we've had on one of these special editions of the Steve Deace Show, which was very much the Rosetta Stone of making sense of what the Barack Obama administration really was. Totally different matter, but kind of a Rosetta Stone level conversation. I think this conversation kind of did, and you said it scratched the surface, and I tend to agree with that because there's so many other trails and rabbit holes that you could have chased down just for me here, you know, sitting here and listening to this conversation for the last 90 minutes. But I want to hone in on something that he said in passing. I can't remember which segment it was in, whether it was the last segment or 2 segments ago. But he said something along the lines of, the phenomenon is presenting different things through different eras. Because we have lived through multiple eras of whatever this is. Mm-hmm. And it's very much, I don't think it's up for debate that there are different things that are being claimed about similar subjects through different times. Little green men in the 60s, kind of that era. Mm-hmm. And then the marked shift a few years ago that you brought up in the New York Times, calling them unidentified aerial phenomena, UAPs, and kind of changing the nomenclature. I just think now, backing up and looking at this from a 10,000-foot perspective, that we could be witnessing just different volleys in the unseen battle. It's very difficult for us to have this conversation because, I mean, we, in terms of this era of this planet, we have some of the longest life expectancies that human beings have ever enjoyed. Nevertheless, though, our time frame on this planet, on this mortal coil, is just kind of a blink. It just seems to me that maybe this is, and it's going on all the time, and Todd, as a Catholic, I'm anxious to hear his perspective because I think the Catholic Church has a longer view of human history than we do, or just history in general. But I just think that this is kind of one blow from hell, or attempted blow from hell, following, you know, a blow from heaven and the forces that represent them. Because I think it's absolutely clear, and I've made this clear on the program, when this topic has come up, I made it clear on this program, for sure, I just think I just think people who claim to have conversed with these interdimensional beings, they're just talking to demons. But after that conversation, I think it's pretty clear that this is not just slipping and falling and just, I don't think it's random. I do think that this is a demonic, you might call it a nefarious plot from hell to try to hoodwink the masses. And I think hell has been very deliberate. And I think hell has been very judicious on when and where to choose its points of attacks. But I just got the sense of during that conversation, I see what you're up to. I see what you're up to. So that's kind of the big 10,000 foot perspective that I had of that conversation. That when you look at the unfolding of history since Christ's earthly ministry, it just seems like this might be one of those blows that hell is trying to land on civilization. I mean, there's just a million different directions we could go with this conversation, because it's not really a conversation about little green men. It's very much a spiritual conversation.
Amen. So, Todd, what do you think?
Well, first, the most interesting new thing I heard that adds a layer I've found legitimately compelling on top of all of the other times we've had somebody like this on or watched a video, and I don't know how many times that's been now. But I do think it was interesting what he said at the end there about what happens to the brain, perhaps in these pilots or very high, akin to high-level athletes, where they're just reaction-based and very intuitive. I think that's compelling, because I think that's how you can kind of go into what is it, Aaron Rodgers and that ayahuasca or whatever. I think that's probably the closest way you can be like on natural psychedelics. When you are in the zone, so to speak, you're just reacting at such a fast pace and not thinking. And therefore, you are perhaps vulnerable in a very unique way. And why this is often pilot-oriented, I found that interesting. But after that, I will just say this: I'm trying to find a visual that will capture what I'm talking about. And last week I did it to some effect. Why don't I go back and do it again? In Avengers Infinity War, when they're going into battle in Wakanda, and they put up the shield, and then these like alien dogs or whatever the heck they are attacking the shield,
Mm-hmm.
and they're coming against it, and they actually like
Get obliterated.
they kill themselves.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, they're being, but they can't stop, and they won't stop.
Because it's just completely operating on nothing but instinct.
Nothing but it.
Yep.
Nothing but instinct, which is not. Speaking of the image and likeness of God, that's not how we were created. So again, when we are a high-level pilot acting on nothing but instinct, perhaps, and suddenly that opens up something that the other side can identify with. But they keep coming at it, and then there's enough volume coming at it that it weakens the actual force field. I think I liken that to what's going on. I think this is nothing but demonic. I think our level of awareness of this should be wise as serpents and innocent as doves. I think to the degree that whatever early kid fanboy interest is that's stuck, I think people should be very wary.
Agreed.
Very wary of that. I think you should run away from this. This should not be your hobby. You should get to confession. You should seek out mass or your equivalent, because this is darkness, and we have a spiritual force field around us that is the grace of God. And as Steve has talked about, what happens when he removes his hand. Well, we keep our level of geeky interest on this, and scientists. What happens when scientists try to harness the demonic? nothing good. Absolutely nothing good. Think total darkness, Vanta Black. So is it bad to have a level of awareness of what's out there?
Mm-hmm.
I'm careful. Not necessarily, but making this way too much of a hobby horse and not realizing that this is nothing but juggling nuclear hand grenades is a mistake. And I don't care if it's Christian pastor there or anybody else. Be very, very, very careful. There's no craft. There's no aliens. There's none of it. There's just demons. And it's pretty clear that our wall is weakening. And in this day and age, we're letting more and more and more of that in the interest of New Age, science. Steve, you laid up the things we lie to ourselves because we'll smash all those idols, but not this one because we like this one. We're kind of geeked out about this one. Be careful.
Yeah, I'll just add this. You mentioned the name Whitley Strieber was invoked. I used to listen to Dreamland. I had no idea that was his background. I didn't know he was the first kind of non-cray-cray person to claim contact. I just thought his podcast was like a knockoff Coast to Coast AM type thing. I'm not going to listen to that anymore. It's not that I'm afraid of it. It's just that.
Now you know the intent behind it, though.
Exactly. Yeah. I'm just not going to give it the time of day.
It's a little bit like if someone...
I don't know if uninterested or disinterested is the right word, but whatever that is. Be aware, but not interested.
It's a little bit like if someone makes a movie in a fictional sense depicting something that our worldview may view as immoral, but it's part of an overall story about the fallen world we're in, then we can debate to what extent is it allowed to go before it violates our conscience, right? To partake of this. But if we find out after the fact that it was made specifically to infest our conscience, well, then we're no longer having that debate. You know what I'm saying? Because now we know what the intent behind it is. This is just not fallen humanity telling a story and doesn't really know, what they're doing. But this is a Prometheus level event. This is an attempt to provoke something. That's kind of what you're saying about the Whitley Strieber podcast. Yeah. Now, because now you know. So along those lines, then tell me, and be honest, tell me how I did in this. Because I definitely wanted this to be a cautionary tale and try to remove my own original fascination with the subject as much as I could. So do you guys think we handled that responsibly on my end here of the conversation?
We probably could have used another hour. That last segment, especially the last half of the last segment, the last answer, we probably could have, maybe should have fleshed that out. We only have 2 hours on this program, so what are we supposed to do? But I think that would have been interesting to flesh that out. I think he ended it on a good note that we, ultimately Christ has already conquered the darkness. But at the same time, there are things that we must be able to contend with and give an answer for. But I think we could have played that out. What happens next? I think we could have played that out for a while.
I mean, on one level, Aaron, we aren't the only intelligent beings God has created because the spiritual realm was created before the material universe. And so we know he created angels, some became fallen and became demons. So there were already pre-existent intelligent beings created by God before we came along. So I guess what we're really now talking about is, and that's where you saw that distinction that he drew, I think, which I didn't have time to ask about because we ran out of time. I think that's the distinction he was drawing when he took my question and flipped it on, will create in the likeness and image of God. It's more than intelligent being. You see, I think that's what he was kind of drawing on. Yeah. What do you think, Todd? How did we handle it?
There's a lot of content to get through, but if we did like Aaron said and we went further, it could, would, and should get darker. I think intuitive. We have nightmares when we're sleeping, and we're nothing but intuitive reactionary beings when we're sleeping. We're not participating in that. I think what people are seeing, a lot of these images are living nightmares. Dreams you're having when you're awake. And again, that's you are totally without agency in those moments. So like I said, the only way to go would be get darker and more comfortable. And again, I don't think that's something we could and should do. I think we need to be going in the opposite direction of this stuff. This is darkness.
And this would not be his eschatology as a Presbyterian. But as we've talked about before, if indeed the premillennial eschatological view proved over the course of human history to be correct, and there was a rapture that preceded some final great tribulation of judgment by God, and the spirit-filled church was removed from this planet in order to not take part in that judgment, what better explanation could you provide the rest of the world for what happened to all these people than what we're talking about right here? I mean, you are seeing the stage is kind of set for a mass delusion level event and explanation for where did all these people that went to church, where did they all go? They all ascended, they all left, they moved on, higher consciousness, and they've ascended. I could see that being an explanation. Indeed, should that theory prove to be correct, I could see that being a viable explanation that a lot of people in our era would buy. Don't you? I could see it.
I think the risk that, man, we've got 45 seconds. I think the risk that hell is taking here, however, trying to analyze this on the fly, is that similar to how there is definitely a backlash in our culture right now to just how demonic the left has become. If this type of phenomenon becomes widespread, where you've got people who have summoned UFOs in every single community, and those people are the most crazy and weird, and
yep.
then there's some blowback. Could be some blowback to that as well.
Yeah, right on. Good stuff. We'll see you next time right here. Till then, Romans 8:28.